Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about The Boys, Season 4, Episode 7. It's called The Insider. So spoilers for the episode. It's funny getting into this one because last week I spent a bit of time talking about the momentum in the season and how it didn't really feel like we were building up to the last two episodes, and now we have the penultimate episode, and I would say that that feeling's still kind of there, and that it doesn't really feel like we're building up to a conclusion. And I was thinking more about this after I talked about last week's episode, that Season 4 might effectively be a prelude to what Season 5 is, so there's not as much big stuff that's going to happen this season because it's ultimately all about setting up the final season and doesn't stand on its own quite as much as some previous seasons have. Now, obviously no season truly stands on its own, it's a TV show, it's serialized. But you look at Season 2, say, and it's the story of Stormfront and her influence on Homelander and all that stuff, and it had a beginning, had a middle, and an end. Season 3 was largely the Soldier Boy stuff, and it was the Temp V, and there was like a very strong focus to the season, that by the end, it felt like the story had concluded a lot of those elements. And this season, I don't think it's had quite that same level of focus on something. Most of the stuff that is there obviously had been seeded prior. There's some new stuff, obviously, like Sage and Firecracker, but it doesn't quite have that same centralized focus for the season in the same way that the last couple did. And I think Seasons 2 and 3 were probably the two best seasons of the show. And Season 4, I think almost by default, may end up being the weakest season because it is just the setup season for Season 5. And while we got one more episode left, I don't know if there's anything that it could do at this point to change that feeling for the season as a whole, because ultimately it's not ramped up in quite the same way. Obviously, yeah, they're going to try and save the president next episode, but I don't feel like the idea that they're going to assassinate the president, well, it's been there since the first episode. It doesn't feel like it's been focusing on that as much throughout the entire season. And this episode, just like last week's, felt like it was kind of starting off slow again. Like we're still doing some things that feel like they're early season stories as opposed to end of season stuff. Which is not to say that I didn't like the episode. There's a lot of stuff in here I really liked, and there's actually some stuff that feel like big step forwards for the show as a whole. In particular, the fact that A-Train being the insider, the leaker, is now open and people know that feels like a big step forward, and the conversations that he has with MM and the decisions that are made for some characters feel like really good stepping stones, you know, for their stories. My favorite thing in this episode, not unsurprisingly, I would say, is probably one of my things that I've been enjoying the last couple seasons, is this idea of like the Battle of Ryan's Soul, and more specifically the Butcher side of it, of him actually realizing that that's the fight that he should be fighting, right? I love that in this episode, Butcher just comes in at the start and confesses what he's done with the scientist, and Kessler's telling him not to, and obviously they're pretty... They're miffed at the severity of what he's done, of course, right? They do react, and Butcher, of course, says, "That's why I'm telling you, I don't want a genocide." Fair enough, right? I enjoy that because he's going against Kessler. He's actively fighting that constantly. And Kessler's in his ear throughout the episode. Butcher gives him the silent treatment effectively. And likewise, Kessler doesn't kind of help when he could at one point. You know, if he's tied to some power and taking over and helping like he did with Ezekiel, then he could have stepped in and he didn't when there was a big fight going on. And I thought maybe, maybe Butcher will take a dark turn before the final season, and the final season will build up to him making a good, right choice. And that might still happen in the finale, don't get me wrong. But my favorite thing in this episode is that the way it paid off with the Ryan subplot. And Ryan's subplot in this is pretty straightforward. He's on a TV set, he's doing a commercial for like a Christmas PSA for kids, for the Vought Kids channel, you know, based on Fox Kids. And he's with puppets, and they're basically just saying a song about ratting out your parents if you think they're anti, you know, American, anti-Vought, if they're liberal in any way. There's lines about vaccines and whatnot. There's multiple lines in this episode about vaccines. When they're talking about the reporter who was killed for being the leak, but then they found out he wasn't the leak. They say that he got an aneurysm directly tied to a vaccine. So yeah, Vought just being on point as per usual. But the way that's paid off with Homelander just kind of ignoring it and just sort of leaving him a message saying, just suck it up and do it for me, eh? And he's very kind of like got his own shit going on, so he's not giving Ryan the attention. Whereas Billy had sent him a Christmas gift. How they let that in when it was addressed to Don't Be a C-Bomb, I don't know, but they did, and it's a photograph of him and Becca and the dog, and it, you know, there's like heartwarming little moment for Ryan. But it all builds up to this moment where Ryan says, you know what, I'm not doing this, and he tells them not to cut to commercial. We're going to sit here and, you know, I'm going to talk about how the fact that my mother, he's been thinking about her, he's been thinking about that she liked Christmas, but she wouldn't like this. And, you know, he clearly isn't comfortable with the message of this short or whatever this PSA style thing is, this puppet show. But what I loved about it, it's not even so much the idea of what he's doing in the scene itself that I loved. It's fine, right? And it's a nice enough little moment. But what I like about it is that the way it cuts to that and the way it happens while Butcher's in the bar and Kessler's talking in his ear and trying to convince him that this is all a lost cause and he needs to be more aggressive, he needs to be more ruthless, whatever. And earlier in the episode specifically, he even said, you know, why do you have faith in him? He's not even yours. Why do you have faith in that boy? And Butcher says, oh, he promised Becca, but it feels like he's kind of like starting to doubt that he's got the strength to stick to that promise as he's talking to Kessler. But then this moment, what I really like about it is this idea, without realizing he's even doing it, Ryan's giving Butcher the other side of this argument. It's not Becca's ghost or whatever it is in Billy's head that's popping up. In fact, she's not shown up since Kessler's become he's become aware that Kessler's not real. It feels like Becca's disappeared since then. But through Ryan, through the part of Becca that's still alive, this real kind of moment of hope of him standing up against what Vought are telling him to do and giving him a better message. You know, he doesn't quite finish, you know, he kind of, I wouldn't say chickens out, but he kind of, you know, he gets a bit emotional and he doesn't finish saying what he was going to say. But it felt like he was about to admit something about Homelander or what Vought do are wrong, or this is all a scam, or whatever it might be. Ashley's looking terrified during this. But that moment, even though he doesn't go through with it, Billy smiles, calls Kessler a wanker, and says, that right there is why I've got faith in him. And I just loved how that paid off. Admittedly, again, it doesn't really feel like a penultimate episode type thing, but I love in a weird way that we're talking about saving Ryan's soul, or the battle for Ryan's soul between being pulled towards Homelander and being pulled towards Billy, or more specifically, Billy representing like the good side and Becca and all the other stuff, is that in a weird way, Ryan is now helping battle for Butcher's soul. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying back in like episode 2 or 3, the episode where they spent the day together, that they're good for each other, that they bring out the best in each other, and then being there and showing each other some love and support is actually the best possible result for either of them. And this is just like another example of like, through the airwaves of television, he's given Billy this moment of hope. Now, Billy does collapse afterwards, so he's not in the best shape physically. Really good moment. I really liked that. I also really liked the big fight that it builds up to. Homelander going against Sage's orders just sends the Deep and Black Noir to go and kill Butcher, effectively. So we get this, it's just Butcher and Starlight who come in, and Deep's just sitting there. And Deep just starts being a complete prick to Annie. So, honestly, we get to enjoy Annie punching the shit out of him and hitting him over the head with a big, I think it's a weight from a weight set. But very, very punchy, kicky, lots of back and forth. I love that they've got a minigun just in a trunk, because that might take down some soups. So Butcher's firing the shotgun, he's firing the minigun, and then this is all, of course, a lot of payoff to a few things in this episode. One, of course, is the fact that MM shows up, as well as A-Train. A-Train shows up and helps, which I actually really like that moment, because I always remember the end of season 1 being Starlight and A-Train fighting each other, right? It was like Starlight finally standing up against Vought, and it was A-Train she fought in that finale. So I think it's really interesting now, you know, several seasons later, the A-Train's showing up to help her fight the fight against Vought. And A-Train, more than ever, is kind of on this side. I mean, if anything, I'd maybe critique that he spells it out a bit too much when he's talking to MM, when he's talking about how the young boy looked at him and it was better than anything he'd ever felt doing stuff for Vought, like he felt like a hero. Like, I got that from the scene. And don't get me wrong, the whole point of this scene is that he's actually giving MM the talk to stick around and be a hero, and and I like that part of it. I actually really loved him saying, me feeling this for the first time and feeling like I did something good is on you. You did that. You were able to put me in that position where I did something good. Not just because he was the one that collapsed and had to be taken to hospital, but even the idea that he recruited him into helping. That's all led to him feeling better than he's ever done with anything else in his life. I like that. I like kind of that element to it. It's an interesting relationship that they never had before this season, but it's just nice that it's kind of developed into this, and maybe shows how MM in some ways is better at this than Butcher, even though MM thinks because of the panic attacks he has to hand off the team back to Butcher, much to Annie's chagrin. But he does spell out the whole thing with the boy where he really just explains what that scene was. And it felt like it was being explained to me a bit too much. And, it's just a writing thing more than anything else. It could have been subdued a little bit. But him convincing MM to stay and show up after he already swooped in to help save the day. This Black Noir can fly, apparently. Also, the others all hear him talk. So, yeah, that's information they have now. But, yeah, MM coming in and being the one to actually fire the minigun was a fun moment. And it really did feel like, at any point, like, Homelander or the others could come to this office and just do whatever. And they haven't for whatever various reasons. But now that Homelander's finally pulled that trigger and sent some lackeys to do this, it really has progressed a lot of things in that they now know A-Train's the leak. And I think even that part of it's interesting, that A-Train doesn't try to conceal it. Like, he doesn't even just swoop in and try and help without being noticed. He swoops in and lets himself be seen, almost like in some way he is feeling a sense of pride of the side that he has now picked, and that he's proud of what he's becoming. And that's an interesting character beat as well. So all of this stuff I really liked. It felt like a big deal in the context of the show as a whole, a lot of these encounters that happen here. But, my critiques of the episode would more broadly just stem from the overall kind of momentum and vibe of it. And there was a lot of jumping around early on. There's a whole scene where Huey goes to Newman when he's supposed to be going to the hospital and tries to get her to sort of back down. She finds out about the camps, the internment camps, which, Huey can tell she didn't know about. But otherwise, she kind of just shrugs it off and says she's okay with the president being killed. Elsewhere, in fact, the thing that leads into that, of course, is that they believe that they know the potential assassin, the hitman that's going to try and take out the president. A-Train got some photos of Sage. I almost said Shade. Sage. Shade's a DC Comics character. And that's where Huey, Starlight, and Butcher go to investigate this guy that's going to be the killer. And they go into the apartment. It's all very kind of Seven-esque. It's kind of gross and grimy. It's all very nasty. And then they find this woman in a closet who is scared at first, and they're being thankful to have found her. But it turns out that this woman is the dangerous element, and as we see afterwards, she is a shapeshifter. This is the guy. This was the hitman that we saw before. But as we see, not only are they a shapeshifter, because it's the boys, they can't just mutate or transform into someone else. One, we see that they have to touch someone. That she touches an older lady on the way out, and then turns into that lady. But like I said, it's the boys. It can't just be a simple thing. It's gross, right? As they're running down the stairs, they see just bits of flesh and gunk and whatever, and it turns out that the shapeshifter has to actually rip off the old face and the old layer of skin to be the new version. So it's a very gross transformation. It's a very icky transformation. But so they set this up, and I actually quite like this character. Not as a character per se, because we don't really know who the character is. Like, we don't know their personality or anything. But as a threat, as like a horror movie style threat of a shapeshifter who's this gross, I actually think it's quite cool and fun. And this plays into the big cliffhanger at the end of the episode, which is that this shapeshifter has become Starlight and even has sex with Huey, and then gets all of Newman's evidence out the safe at the end. Presumably that means Newman's asked Homelander to help retrieve this, now that she's working with him. I say that because this is, this assassin was got via Sage, so I assume it's connected to Homelander. That said, though, who knows? Maybe Sage, given what happens with her, and we'll talk about that in a minute, maybe she's went rogue and asked the assassin to do something else just for her because she's made a separate deal with Newman or someone else. Like, there could be some reveals here as to who's actually ordered this, but obviously going for the safe with Newman's stuff in it, which they clearly showed us earlier in the episode. They had Hughie put it away in the safe, so we knew what it was. That's the end of the episode. Now, the question I have, right? Obviously, it's you know, icky for Hughie that he's had sex with this person who he thought was Annie and it isn't, right? That's its own kettle of fish to potentially discuss when it all comes out. The bigger issue here, I think we have to discuss, right? The more pertinent issue is the fact that when she is pretending to be Starlight, right? Or this person is pretending to be Starlight, I should say, because who knows what gender they identify as, never mind started as. But this person seemed to know things. Like, she engaged in conversation with Hughie that referenced conversations they had at the start of the episode about throwing out the outfit, about some other things that happened throughout the episode that this character couldn't know. I mean, the character could know that Hughie had to go to the hospital because this character was the one that cut him, but there's some other specific things that I don't think they should know. Unless Hughie and Starlight talked about some of this stuff at the apartment and it was overheard, but I don't think they did. Which suggests to me that when this shapeshifter becomes someone, they do actually get some of their memories or get a sense of like who they are. They're not just having to fake it effectively, even though obviously they're still in control as they're themselves. They seem to know things, at least based on this Starlight couple of scenes at the end of the episode, because she does seem to reference things that the shapeshifter wouldn't know. So it doesn't come off as a really obvious twist. In fact, to be honest, if I have a critique here with this, is that it's kind of the opposite almost, where I felt like the little series of flashbacks to show how it happened felt a little bit clunky. Now, I'm not saying that we didn't need them in some way, because my instant thought was, wait, when did this happen? Because there's no way there's no way the switch happened at the apartment building when they first encountered the shapeshifter, right? It just wouldn't have made any sense. So they have to show how this happened. And, you know, Starlight wakes up wherever she really is, next to some husks, and she realizes, oh, that woman that got the selfie at the bar was the shapeshifter. And then there's a quick cut of her being like sort of grabbed and gassed before she gets into her apartment at home. And that leads her to here. That's how the shapeshifter made the switch. She was just literally kidnapped on the way home. It felt like it was squeezing in a lot of like details here, just at the last second, to explain how this happened, which just made it feel a little bit clunkier to me than it could have done. I do wonder if maybe it would have been worth not explaining this stuff until next episode. Like, maybe just have Annie wake up. Maybe still do the thing where she realizes that it's the woman from the bar, that husk that's next to her. Like, have her realize who that is and flashback to that quickly. But I think showing the quick little snippet of her being grabbed at her front door just made it feel a little bit like we're having to explain it overly. Like I'm watching a Saw movie and we have to explain how Jigsaw got his victim. I don't know. It went a little step too far for my taste in the explaining. Because it just kind of like, I don't know, it raised all these questions about the timeline of this, and like I thought she was, I mean, I guess Hughie wasn't at the bar. Hughie was separate from them the whole episode, but still, I don't know. It just felt a little bit clunky. And I think, you know, if anything, that's kind of what I was saying about the episode, especially the first half of the episode. It felt like we were jumping around a lot of characters. There was a lot of little things going on. And to his credit, some of them did meet up nicely by the end, like Ryan and Butcher's things neatly connected together. Obviously, the A-Train and Ashley stuff kind of came together. I mean, to talk about some of these other characters that I've not mentioned yet, Ashley's freaking out throughout the episode. She's just getting drunk all the time. And notably, when A-Train takes the time to speed in to tell Ashley, hey, by the way, Homelander's going to find out that I'm the leak because the others know, it's time to go. He didn't have to do that. He could have just never went back to that building to protect himself, but he went to go get Ashley anyway. And Ashley does seem very tempted. There's a moment where she's almost about to agree to go with him, but she chooses not to, because of course, running away would be admitting that she's guilty of something, and she's too scared of what Homelander and Co might do in that eventuality. By staying here, obviously A-Train's not going to rat her out. He's got no reason to. Right? Plus, he's becoming a better person, so it'd be a bit of a dick move if he just went, oh, by the way, before I go, Catch me if you can, but Ashley was doing stuff too. Go and get her. She knew about things. But, you know, it's an important little moment where she's not ready to make that choice. And it's kind of interesting having A-Train try and talk her into, like, you know, freedom. Like, hey, come and be free from this company, away from this awful place. This place turns you into a monster. And Ashley herself was showing guilt in this episode over the reporter, the newsman, because she's the one who fed them the lie that got him killed, right? She suggested that he was a good scapegoat for Sage or whoever, right? And she's feeling guilty about that. She's realizing how much of a monster you can be because you're part of this company. This place makes you the worst you can possibly be, and she's kind of processing that. And I think A-Train tried to talk her into, you know, giving it up and running away and giving her this chance. It reminds me a lot of earlier A-Train stories where characters appealed to him and then he made the wrong choice and still did something for Homelander instead. That happened in season 2 and 3, where it felt like, oh, his path is going this way, but then he makes this bad choice. Maybe he'll never be good. But here it feels like he has turned a corner, and it is very interesting where he tries to do this for someone else. And in this case, it's not Ashley doing something bad. She's just too scared to run. But it is interesting giving him this moment where he's now the one trying to talk someone else into leaving Vought, and they're too scared to do it, just like he was too scared to go against them in earlier seasons. I like that kind of, you know, the reference, the comparison between the characters and the different stages of their stories. That's really good. So that was Ashley, more or less. We also had Sage, of course, who gets fired by Homelander. They're not really happy with her throughout the episode. Homelander's making little digs, keeps her away from looking for the mole. Him and Firecracker are going to do that, which leads to the gross scene with Webweaver, where Webweaver's admitting to things, but it's just because he wants to get a fix. He tries to deny it at the last second. He's farting out through his web hole, just webs constantly, and it sounds disgusting. They're acting disgusted, and then Homelander ultimately rips him from the shoulder down vertically, and it's gross, it's over the top, it's gory. And Firecracker actually looks disturbed. Like, she's kind of realizing, oh no, this man that I am now stuck to and pledged my loyalty to is actually a maniac, and it's too late to back out. I'm not saying she wants to back out, but there's definitely a moment there when Homelander said, thanks for that, Firecracker, and she just goes, you bet! Like, she sort of goes really high up in her voice, and she's clearly in shock of what she's just seen. It does lead to a funny little moment, actually, where later on, when he's really angry after Sage has admitted that she knew that A-Train was the mole, and that was something that she was using. She was intentionally using A-Train to only leak the information she wanted the other characters to know. It was a misinformation campaign for her so that they'd be in the right place at the right time. And now that she's been fired, it'll be interesting to see where she goes and what she does with that information. But she does get fired, and she does leave, which... Interestingly, it's implied that Black Noir and her were also having like a casual love affair, although maybe not with lobotomies. I don't know if the joke was meant to be that Black Noir, or this, you know, Black Noir II, was too dumb to realize that she was performing lobotomies to have sex with him, or if the joke is that she didn't have to do that with him, only with the Deep, just to make the Deep look even more pathetic. I mean, the second option there is definitely the funnier one to me, but I got a chuckle out of that. But yeah, so that's Sage in this episode. I guess we should mention the Deep, who seemingly kills his octopus by smashing the tank after the octopus accuses him of having trysts with Sage. And it was, you know, it was fine. This was one of these things where it was maybe just a little subplot too many for me in this episode. So sometimes you can have too many of these, and this was definitely one that I think you could have cut for now. I mean, I don't know where else you'd put it necessarily. Maybe combine it with, you know, some more deep stuff in a previous episode, but it was maybe just one little plot thread too many going on. Like, I don't think we really needed this for the Deep's involvement in all the other stuff that Homelander makes him do. I think those moments would work completely fine on their own. You know, I don't think they needed these extra scenes with him and the octopus beforehand. It does linger a long time on the door as he's sitting there hearing the octopus like cry out in pain. They really milked that for a little bit, but Yeah. Also, the Deep, when he's lying in bed with the octopus earlier on in the episode, is still wearing his like superhero like boots and gloves, whilst being otherwise in his underwear, and that was just a visual. It was a visual. I don't even know what to say, but it feels like, of course he does. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that you Deep. That's all I can really say to it. I'm just not surprised. And then I've already kind of mentioned the stuff by and large, but there's a couple of scenes where he, kind of talked about the start and the end of his story, but he tries to sort of get tickets for his wife or ex-wife and daughter to go to Belize. He's like, hey, there's some big shit going down. You have to be away from the cities. Like, go here, blah, blah, blah. And the wife kisses him and says, hey, come with us, right? Let's be a family again. That panic attack was a warning. Maybe it's time for you to finally stay away from this and come just be a father and come just be that, right? Like, I believe you. I've always, like, she's never doubted, like, why he's doing what he's doing. It's more just that he's away from them and obsessed with it and all the rest of it. And it seems like he agrees. In fact, when A-Train comes to speak to him, he catches him printing out a boarding pass to go with them. But ultimately, the pep talk from A-Train and then his big sort of coming to save them with the minigun is obviously big moments enough, but we do actually get a scene with Mem later when he calls his ex-wife and explains that he's not coming because he has to do that to keep them safe. She's not very happy about it, of course, and he hangs up before he has to overly explain anything. Although one of A-Train's points when he's trying to convince him was a fair one. It was like, well, you really think all of this isn't going to eventually hit other parts of the world? Like, you think Belize is going to be excluded when Homelander goes on his wrath of whatever it is, when he starts putting people in camps and try to rule the world? Like, there's nowhere to run. There's never going to be a safe place to run to. He has to be stopped, so that makes sense. I guess the other thing we should talk about, which I've not even really mentioned yet, is that when Butcher comes in at the start of the episode and explains what he's done with the scientist, he says that the scientist is struggling to make this virus and blah, 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 blah. We need someone to help him. And then in walks Frenchie, right? Looking very nervous, very shy. Kimiko's obviously firing some glances at him. It's all very awkward. I will admit, I did get a little annoyed at this moment, purely just because I'm like, this is it. This is what him not accepting the invitation or the visitations at the prison were building up to. It was just this. He's just back already. I don't know. It feels like we spent most of this season with him on his guilt trip about the boyfriend and what he'd done in his past, and finally admitting it, and I didn't really enjoy most of that plot. It was definitely the weakest part of the first half of this season. For him to go to prison and turn himself in, which I did like, at least that he finally made that choice, and now he's just back out already. And seemingly, it's not really affected all that much. Like, obviously, he's still feeling guilty, and I don't hate the scene where Kimiko also admits why she feels guilty and that she killed other girls and she was made to do it quietly and she just never started speaking again after that. Like, that's an interesting part of her story for sure. But again, I think this is, along with the Deep subplot, this is another subplot that felt like it was bogging the episode down a little bit because we had so many characters and subplots to jump around to. Of course, we have the added guilt of like lying to the scientist that this serum won't also be used on Newman as well as Homelander. But we get the big climax of this, which is the scientist has actually gotten through his chains over all this time, and they kind of make some digs at Butcher that he must have been locked up for a while to like cut through those chains. But he stabs Kimiko with the virus in the leg and runs away. Of course, Frenchie's too busy caring about her to chase after him, so it's like, okay, was it a real virus, or did he just inject her with something to make her think? No, the virus is there, it's spreading, we can see it on her leg, and the resolution to this is to cut off her leg. And they actually had me for a second here where I forgot that the leg would grow back, and I thought, oh god, is Kimiko just going to have one leg for a while? But if you remember, this season opened with that big, ridiculous thing of her like getting her arm cut off and going out the window, and the arm is growing back, and we see her leg growing back in the next scene here. But yeah, we get this scene where Frenchie has to saw off her leg, and he's like apologizing as he does it. But yeah, fair enough. Her leg grows back. They've confirmed it works, and the old leg, which is all got boils on it and is all diseased, is sitting there now. So now Frenchie's got something to work with to maybe extract the virus and make a new dose of it for Homelander and potentially Newman. So yeah, I mean, that's like plot stuff that needs to be done with the end of this plot specifically. It did kind of feel like the Frenchie stuff has been kind of spinning its wheels, and even now, after we've had a couple of important like turning points in that story, it still kind of feels like we're still just dealing with him being sad about his past in ways that aren't particularly engaging. It almost feels like they just didn't have much for him to do until it was time to use him as a chemist to make this virus and work with the other scientists. So that's how we ended up with all that other plot. Like, you could have had him turn himself in to like the police for his past, like episode 1 of the season, maybe even between the seasons if you really wanted to. And we could have really missed Frenchie so that when Butcher brought him back, it might have felt like a big deal. But it didn't feel like a big deal because it had only been 2 episodes. I mean, hell, yeah. I mean, depending on how you want to count it, it was only 1 full episode that he was gone because it was the end of the previous episode that he turned himself in. So he was only gone for 1 episode, right? We only had 1 episode of his absence. So it just didn't feel like that big of a deal that he was back. And instead, it was the opposite reaction of what is like, that's it? That's all this is? That was all it was ever going to be, was 1 episode? After all that build-up all season? So I do think that's quite frustrating. I think Frenchie's story has been kind of... It's been a little repetitive before, don't get me wrong, about his past coming to get him and all the rest of it, but I think this season it really felt like they didn't really know what to do with him, other than they've got some ideas to develop Kimiko's story, and they want to sort of like have them relate to each other because they've both got their shared guilt that they want to deal with about their past, and they can bond over that. And that's a nice enough moment on its own, but you could have like just subtly reminded us of his past at some point before that moment, instead of having to like, you know, marinate us in it all season effectively, and that be all of his plot is that, as opposed to, you know, other characters who it feels like, you know, like where they've been building up to over the course of the season feels like, no, the story keeps progressing, it keeps changing, and it keeps developing who they are as characters and challenging how they feel about things with new ideas and new elements. And it just doesn't feel like Frenchie's had that quite the same way. So, yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in this episode. There's a lot of really great moments that I loved. Character development moments. Billy Ryan, the whole TV thing at the end, I thought was perfect. I really enjoyed MM and A-Train, and I enjoyed the big fight scene, and of course the grossness of the shapeshifter. But, you know, the Starlight switcher at the end was a little bit clunky in some ways, and there was a couple of subplots that I think just bogged the episode down a bit, particularly in the first half especially. So yeah, there you go. That's my thoughts on this week's episode of The Boys. We'll be back next week for the season finale, and we'll see how the season wraps up. But thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep it all coming. Look out for everything else I'm reviewing. I reviewed a new Apple show yesterday called Sunny, starring Rashida Jones. You can check out my review of that. Plus, there's a bunch of classic shows, some that I've picked, some that are Patreon sponsored, that are going out throughout the week. But yeah, that is me. Thank you very much. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?